Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this February 16th meeting of the Charlotte City Council Budget and Effectiveness Committee. I'd like to start with introductions of committee members.
Julie Islip, committee member.
Other committee members on the call.
Renee Johnson, committee member, District 4.
Braxton Winston at large, non-committee member.
I think we're missing a committee member. Mr. Graham, are you on the call?
Mr. Graham is still logging on.
All right, so my name is Ed Driggs. I am the chair. Could we have staff members introduce themselves, please?
Ryan Bergman, strategy and budget.
Kelly Flannery, CFO.
Brent Cagle, City Manager's Office.
Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
Tina James, Deputy City Attorney.
Angela Charles, Charlotte Water Director.
Mike Davis, Charlotte Water and Stormwater Services.
Hey, Mike.
David Zer, Deputy Director with Charlotte Water.
Chad Howe, Charlotte Water CFO.
I get
Thomas Powers.
Charlotte Water is on our agenda today. Thomas, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Driggs.
Office. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? All right, so let's get started. We have, if you look at our agenda, we've got 3 items on here, important items. We're going to talk about the census data and redistricting considerations, and I think you're aware of some of the discussion that has gone on based on the availability of census data. We're going to look at stormwater and the Charlotte Water budget outlook, and then the agenda for the March budget workshop. And if I may, I'd like to kick off the first topic, which is census data and redistricting considerations. I think you're aware by now that we have an issue that has taken shape as a result of delays in the delivery of census data. And just to sort of walk through what the issues here are, there is a basic requirement, a constitutional requirement that's been referred to as one man, one vote, or one person, one vote, that says that all districts must be approximately the same size. And the logic of that is, Councilmember Graham, welcome to the call. The logic of that is that you don't want to have one district with 300,000 people and another district with 50,000 people, each having one representative, because that would sort of give more power, as it were, to the smaller districts. So districts are meant to be the same size. The U.S. Legal rulings on the subject have decreed that the discrepancy in the size of the districts can't be more than 10%. In North Carolina, legal decisions have indicated that, in fact, that needs to be 5%. So basically, no district can be smaller or larger than plus or minus 5% of the average for all the districts. Municipalities are required to redraw districts to meet this requirement after a census. So you have to update your districts in order to get in compliance with the one person, one vote rule when there has been a census. On the other hand, municipalities are not allowed to redraw the districts except after a census or an annexation that involves a significant population change. So Charlotte has not redistricted since 2010, and the fact is our district populations are out of whack. And in fact, some estimates we have seen suggest that the biggest districts now probably have about 150,000 people in them, and the smaller ones are probably 120. So we are way wide of a plus or minus 5% requirement. We were able to conduct elections with these unequal districts in 2019 because we weren't allowed to redistrict other than with census data or in the case of annexation. And the annexation issue has been moot since involuntary annexation was banned. So this year, though, we have a different situation because there was a census in 2020. We learned on Friday that the data from that census is not going to be available until the end of September. And you can imagine that trying to achieve a regular election timeline this year when we're not going to have the census data until the end of September is essentially an impossibility. The way the normal process works is that when the census data is available, you start a redistricting process. So we will get data files that represent the definitive statement from the Census Bureau about what the populations are, and that will kick off a redistricting process. That process typically takes about 3 months. And the filing period for an election based on the new districts cannot commence until at least 3 days after the districts themselves are finalized. So if you now think about, if we get the data at the end of September and it takes us a few months to actually come up with the new districts, and we're not allowed to start filing until after that, clearly there is no way to achieve an election this year, except if we were to consider proceeding with an election based on the old districts. If you think that then further, assuming the candidate filing could occur sometime after the redistricting happens, you're out in December or January at that point. So the other possibility that the municipality has is to defer the election. And the deferral of the election, and Mr. Baker, I don't know if you're able to kind of confirm on this point now, but the indication I have is that if we did defer, the intention of the law as it stands would be that we postpone our elections such that our general election takes place at the same time as the primary elections scheduled for 2022 for other races. And Mr. Baker, if you're on the call, are you able to confirm that point? Or another city attorney, a couple of you are.
And I'll let Lena jump in. We're still trying to confirm that, but the way that the statute is written right now, it appears that our primaries are going to be tied to the county primaries, which are in March, and potentially an April 26th runoff, with a November 8 as the general election, even for the city. But I'm trying to double check that. But that's our initial read from the statutory language that exists right now.
That's
All
right,
right,
Mr.
well,
Baker and Mr. Driggs. And I believe we have a
Yes.
slide that outlines some of those dates, but it appears that our proposed dates would align with the county election schedule.
All right, well, that would actually be easier than if it were the case that we had to try and get there. So let's say that the city decides to defer. That would imply, according to the information just received, that we would be on a schedule that aligns with the county schedule and the 2022 elections, which ordinarily call for filing to occur in December, a primary to occur at a date that is sort of movable, but tends to be in the March timeframe, movable by the legislature, and then a general election in November for next year. So we are now looking at again, a pretty clearly drawn choice between trying to get an election done this year based on old districts and inviting all kinds of challenges based on the fact that we would clearly be afoul of the one man, one vote rule in the aftermath of a census that had taken place, or the city decides to defer, which would then put us on the same timeline as other 2022 elections next year. It's unclear, I believe, from some information I've received, whether we have an option to defer or we're required to, but clearly trying to get something done this year would invite legal challenges. The last point I think I'll make about this is the General Assembly may well decide to actually take action on this. There are over 40 municipalities in North Carolina that are faced with the same issues we would be, namely all of those that actually have districts. So even though there are some 500 municipalities in North Carolina, only 40 of them are affected by this because the others all have at-large elections. So because the initial burden of making these decisions falls on us. We have to consider this as a council, and we have to decide on a plan, even if we think there's a good chance that the General Assembly will actually intervene and impose a solution on all of us. And so our committee is meeting today to talk about this. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, and by all means, ask your questions. Now the attorneys are standing by and ready to respond. Any comments?
I have my hand up, Mr. Chair.
I can't see that, so yes, Mayor.
Okay. Yeah, so a couple of questions. What are they basing it on when, I mean, we know the districts are uneven, but what data are we using to say, yep, those two districts are definitely off by 18%, or, you know, what's the basis for that?
So the planning staff, Taiwo Jehovah, did some work based on data that we have from other sources as a city to arrive at estimates. And these are by no means binding, but we were just looking for an indication of what our actual situation is. And so his conclusion, his recommendation to us was that as of 2018, it appeared that we had this discrepancy of some 20 or 30% between our smallest and largest districts based on differences in growth rates that have occurred since the last time we redrew.
Okay, and would the General Assembly not have a problem with the fact that literally every office would be up for election in the same election? Because this would affect City Council, but I understand that CMS has also asked permission to defer their election. Of course, they only have a general election. They don't have a primary. But in effect, it would mean that every office, including congressional offices, would be in the same election cycle. And I'm just wondering if there's a reason they wouldn't want to do that.
I haven't really gotten into a lot of detail with the people I know, but I think you have to understand we're dealing with the least of evils here. So we don't have a perfect solution, right? Either we try to get something done this year, in which case it could only be on the basis of the old districts and in clear violation of the one person, one vote, or we defer until next year, and that does have issues related to it. I think my impression is that the sensitivity to the one person, one vote issue would take precedence in the minds of the legislature. It's a personal opinion, so but I think they would be more concerned about having elections that were based on data that was known to be obsolete in this year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Winston.
Just a side note, I have reached out to some members of our local delegation in the past few days, and they have not actually spoken about it as a delegation. I think they're trying to find time to meet soon. So they will talk about that shortly.
All right, appreciate that. Ms. Ajmira.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we defer the election to next year, Mr. Attorney, what does that mean for our bond referendum? Would that also go in the ballot next year?
So a lot of that depends on whether or not the school board will be having an election or not. You cannot have a standalone ballot referendum on sales tax by itself. So it really just depends on whether or not there's any election of any kind in 2011 going forward. I would say that I would have some concerns about that, but I've not had the chance to talk to the school board or the school board attorneys about what their plans are. But it is certainly something that we're monitoring as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. And also, what does that, if we defer the election to next year, what does that mean for future elections? does that mean we are, so the local election would be in 2020 along with county commissioners and others, and then 2021, I mean 2022 I meant, and then there'll be another election in 2023 again, is that correct?
So as the law stands right now, that's what you're looking at. An extension of the term of your current terms for 1 year to the 2022 election, and then that election would be for 1 year. The 2022 election would be for 1 year, and then you would have another election in 2023. That's the way that the law stands right now. I've had some conversations with folks at the league, and I know that they're having some very preliminary discussions with the General Assembly about some potential alternatives to that. But at this stage, all I can tell you is what's on the books right now, with the caveat that there may be some additional things on the books by the time we get to that point.
Got it. So to follow up on that, Mr. Baker, I know General Assembly is looking into it and you're working with them. Do we have any timeline about when we hear from them?
I am, the short answer to your question is no. I am hoping that we get some information in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And in my mind, I'm thinking end of March, we really need to know, is the General Assembly going to chime in, or are these 40-something municipalities going to be left to their own discretion in terms of taking advantage of the provisions that currently exist in the statute? Ideally, I think we would like for the General Assembly to make that call, but I don't know that for a fact, and it would be good before, in my mind, at least the end of March, and you as the political folks may feel differently about that. But I think that we need to know whether they're going to chime in or sit on the sidelines.
Yes, and I agree with that. And we need to know some sort of, we need to have some sort of timeline as to what General Assembly is going to do. Thank you, Mr. Baker.
And I would add to that from my conversations, they haven't established their own timeline yet. And in fact, not much has happened there from the sound of it. I think they're aware of the issue. And my impression is that they expect to intervene, but I haven't been able to ascertain anything about a timeline.
So Mr. Driggs, I know that in the memo that Mayor had sent out, we are scheduled to give an update to full council on February 22nd, I believe. So this is a moving target. I mean, it's difficult to provide an update because we are still sort of dependent on General Assembly's action and how that decision could potentially impact what we end up doing. Thanks.
Yes, I think the point I was making was we have to move ahead as if the responsibility will remain with us, even knowing that there is likely to be an action by the General Assembly. We can't wait to find out whether or not they're going to act before we start to consider what we would do if it does come down to us. So the idea is we move forward on the basis that this decision is ours to make, but we recognize that it could be taken out of our hands. And I think it would be helpful, frankly, to all of us as candidates to have some clarity about at least what the city would intend to do under these circumstances. And then we'll obviously, if the General Assembly acts, then that's going to take the thing out of our hands. If I may, we have a question, but I wanted to quickly comment for the benefit of anybody that might be watching. The school board has staggered 4-year elections. So every 4 years, the 3 at-large members get elected, and then in 2 years later, the 6 district people get elected. 2021 is a district election year for the school board. It's a nonpartisan election, so they don't have a primary, which means their timeline is somewhat different from ours, and therefore it's possible that they would reach a different conclusion from us about whether or not to conduct their election. And hence the city attorney's reference to the possibility that there could be a school board election, even if we decide that we can't do one. And that might be an opportunity for us to do our referendum. The other thing I will mention is that as the events are unfolding on the mobility plan, it is conceivable, and I'll just offer this as a personal opinion, that we are better off targeting 2022 for our referendum anyway. We need to see how the process of promoting this plan unfolds to have confidence about the outcome of the referendum before we schedule it. But I'm just suggesting it's not totally impossible that we would be better off doing it in 2022 anyway. And now I think, is it Ms. Johnson? Do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about the one man, one vote principle. So in 2019, we know that the districts were not equally distributed or might have been over the 5%. So we were, I don't want to say in violation, but we were able to have elections despite that information. So with the fact that we don't have census data available, and it's my understanding that the law doesn't say every 10 years, it just says when the census data is available. So the fact that it's not available, could we move forward with an election based on the same principle that we had the 2019 election, given the fact that the data is not available?
I like the way she thinks, Patrick. I said the same. I asked him the same question. So would you tell us your answer?
I just spent a good bit of time talking to Mr. Driggs about this. Ultimately, we expect to get that census information prior to the election. And we are going into the election knowing that in all likelihood, we're going to have to redistribute the population to balance it out anyway. As you get further away from the census data that created your districts are going to be a little bit out of whack. That's a very precise legal term, out of whack. I'm kidding. And that's just to be expected because you can't have a census every 2 years to make sure that you're perfectly in line each and every time. So there's just some level of discretion that's anticipated as you get closer to the redistricting period. But once you move into that census period and get that information, that's typically when that one person, one vote requirement kicks in to require us to redistrict and redistribute the population. So practically speaking, there wouldn't be much of a difference between the populations being out of accord from 2019 to 2021. But legally speaking, once you've done that census, that's really the part that kicks in, says can't do 2021 until you've looked at your districts and make those changes. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. I like the out of whack. It's layperson's terminology, so it's good. Now, would there be anything to prohibit the at-large council members from having an election?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Mr. Phipps, that was his first question to me. There is no way to break up the process of council elections. If you had the situation like the school board has, where at-large is in one election and districts are in a separate election, then you could do that. But we can't change our election mode now in time for the fall 2021 election.
What would it take to change it?
You would have to, it's hard to imagine, particularly with 2-year terms, because you really can't stagger your terms between at-large and districts unless you've got 4-year terms. I've not seen that before, but you're talking about changing your election process, similar to some of the conversations that we had with the Committee on Governance and some of those issues. You'd have to go through that entire process to make that happen.
And then
just going to add that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Lena. I was just going to add that it might actually require changing the charter language, which, as you know, would then require going to the General Assembly.
And then lastly, is there any precedent to this process, or has this happened before?
So the language was created in 1991 to address some delays that came out of that particular census. But the delays were not as extensive as we're talking about now. It just, you would expect this information typically at the end of March of the year after. So the 2021 year, you'd expect it at the end of March. And I don't recall specifically when that language came in or the data came in 1991, but it was after the anticipated time. But still in time to, before the filing period started. And that's why that option was given to those communities that weren't able to determine their districts in time for the filing of the 1991 election process.
Okay, thank you.
Great questions. And I tested the theory that we should be able to do what we did in 2019 based on the fact that we don't have the census data. And people I know, like former members of the legislature and so on, just said it is very different if there has been a census. And so that analogy would probably not hold up, and the likelihood of a legal challenge would be greater in these circumstances. Mr. Winston, did you have another comment?
Well, Ms. Johnson asked my question. My question would be, what are the possible paths forward here? What is the timeline actually looking like for a decision to be made?
Well, I think, we've come down to, for one, really only two options. One is that we would proceed this year with elections based on the existing districts, and try to sort of refer to 2019 and the fact that we don't actually have census data. Or the alternative is that we defer, and that we then have time to do our redistricting and conduct the election in accordance with updated numbers. And so those are our two choices, basically. We thought for a while it was unclear when the data might come through, that there could be a path to a greatly accelerated redistricting, primary, et cetera, process, such that we could get elections done in 2020, 21 based on the census data. But when the word came out on Friday that the data wasn't going to be available until the end of the September, the window kind of closed on any hope of getting elections done this year based on the new census data. So now we're left with either an election this year based on the old districts or a deferral. So if there are no other comments.
I do have one quick comment that Ms. Johnson's questions just brought to mind. It could be interesting to really think about the fact that if our governance committee is going to make a recommendation for 4-year terms, and we'd have to figure out how to stagger those terms, that committee made the recommendation of 4-year terms that would be staggered. This could be an opportunity to figure out how to do that by having at large at one point, district at one point. So it's just something to think about.
I believe the law says it has to take effect after the next election. So we're screwed either way.
As a technical term, I know, sorry.
Yes, that's right. That's right up there with out of whack, Would you guys please speak English, because we lay people can't keep up. You're right, Mr. Winston, and thank you for that. We had the other question of whether we should have an 8th district, and I don't know whether council actually, reached a majority conclusion about whether that was something we wanted to pursue. I do think, as a personal opinion, that the deferral gives us an opportunity to do something in an orderly fashion and in compliance with the law. It does raise other questions about whether we're then running for 1 year or 3 years. I think we should expect that we need to get back on the odd year cycle. So as I say, unanswered is the question of whether we would then be running for 1 year or 3. 3 might be a little toe in the water in terms of longer terms. But I think we can move ahead with the basic question of deferral versus trying to do something this year, notwithstanding how that particular question might be answered. And I think this committee at this point should probably just try to reach a consensus that we bring this report and this data that we've all talked about forward to the full council. I don't know that it's up to us to actually reach a conclusion about which of these two possibilities. So our goal at the coming council meeting would simply be to broaden the conversation we're having now to get everybody up to speed I think make clear that in practice, notwithstanding all the stuff that we've talked about and the possibility that we considered earlier of trying to do something based on new data this year, that where we stand right now based on the announcement by the census on Friday is a choice between trying to do something this year based on old districts with the one person, one vote issue, or deferring to a schedule that, as we've just heard, would align with the 2022 elections. So if everybody on the committee is okay with that, we will just go to full council on Monday and share this thought process that we've just been through. I see Mr. Winston's hand is up.
I'm not on the committee, but I agree with Mr. Driggs, kind of the way he has laid it out. Although I would say, for many different reasons, but for democracy's sake and for the people's sake, I think full council does need to make a decision rather quickly. I think, Mr. Baker, I think you can help us here have of the full conversation with the community. I think it would be helpful. Obviously, we have to, part of the decision making is what is our exposure. And it seems pretty likely that if we have this election in November of 2021, you know, that we will open ourselves up to a lot of, you know, to a lot of potential legal trouble. So if we can like kind of go through kind of honestly the lawyer-client exercise. I know we would usually do it in a closed session, but I think there is a particular public relevance here to have that kind of conversation so full council can come up with, this is a pretty, it seems like this is a pretty binary choice. There's not a lot of kind of nuance to it. It's a one or the other. So hopefully we can push it through. And I think the legal predicament that we're in is the number one piece of evidence that we need to kind of consider as we make a decision for the entirety of our city.
And since Mr. Winston agreed with me, I'm happy to recognize him as an honorary member of the committee. Mr. Baker, any comment about that?
No, I agree. And I will tell you, if you haven't kind of figured out my position, I think it would be a real problem legally to move forward with the 2021 elections as is, based on the information that has been presented about our current districts. And you'll just be at that stage where you can either move forward or you can wait for the to see what the General Assembly is going to do. You can almost do a combination of the two, because the General Assembly could easily make a determination that we would need to be bound by if they choose to do that. And I'm trying to the extent that I can get that information to you before your next before the full council meeting. I'd love to let you know what the mood of the General Assembly is, again, in terms of whether they want to come into the game or just sit on the sidelines and let local governments do as they please.
So my own view is that the implication of everything we've heard is actually fairly clear, but I would not recommend that this committee go to full council with a fully baked conclusion. So what I would like to do is just walk through the same exposition we've just heard, address the different branches and contingencies, and then get everybody on council to the same place that we are now in terms of understanding what our choices are and what the implications are of the decision we make. I do agree that we need to move quickly to establish our position on this, and then we will just wait and see whether we get more information about any action the General Assembly may take. I think if we actually take a decision or indicate a preference, that could be seen, or that could influence the General Assembly. They may look at what we talk about and what we decide and take that as input in terms of their thinking about what should be done, especially because we are the biggest city in North Carolina. So I'm hoping we can have a good constructive discussion, and I think it's clear what is probably the better outcome in terms of the perception of the General Assembly, but we will deal with that on Monday if everybody's okay. Any further comment? All right, Lena, we didn't look at your slides. I apologize for that. If you've circulated them, I think it's okay for everybody to look at them, but unless you feel we need them in order to complete this discussion, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Is that okay?
Yep, absolutely. I would just I'll point you to slide number 7, not to look at now, but at your leisure, which outlines what the dates and the timeframes look like if we were proceeding in 2021, and then what they'd look like if we're looking at 2022. And the critical juncture under the law is that if we were proceeding and had the data, which we are not going to, it had to have happened by July 21st. And so that's the critical date under the law, is that do we have the data based on which new lines could be drawn? If that was going to happen, you'd have to do that by July 21st. And now, based on what the Census Bureau has told us, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to meet that timeline. So,
can we get that slide up, slide 7 from Lena's presentation? It would be good for everybody to see, because this timeline question will come up. And I've sort of alluded to it in general terms that we have actual dates here.
I'm hoping Wendy or somebody can help us pull that up.
We're trying. Hold on just a second.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting, can I ask a question?
Please, go ahead.
So the reason for the delay is because the census data was delayed at a federal level. Is it possible that the federal government is going to have input on how states or localities should proceed?
I don't think we're expecting that. I think the general assumption is that this is something where the states have sovereignty. I mean, recognizing how we're organized generally, the states are the primary lawmakers. The federal government has enumerated powers. So, Mr. Baker, weigh in here, but I regard it as unlikely that the federal government would actually try to impose a countrywide settlement on this thing.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that this is going to be a state decision without any particular input from the federal government. I was hoping to hear that the federal government was going to almost do like an all hands on deck to get that information out to us, but it's actually gone the opposite way. But I don't see the federal government chiming in on the local elections.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I will note that one of the differences, it seems to be, is that I think this year they're going to be releasing the state and the local, the block level data, which is what we need for local elections, that block level data, as well as the statewide numbers, it looks like are going to be released at one time. So presumably there's some efficiency there. I think typically in years past, the states get the general numbers first, and then the more detailed local information comes a little bit later, a few months later.
I have a slideshow of a presentation by the public relations, I think it is, officer for the Census Bureau, that kind of goes through the reasons for the delay. And it's COVID, it's storms, it's fires, it's political unrest. There are a bunch of reasons they cite. And as of that time, which was late in January, they were still indicating a late July date. And then, as I say, we got on Friday the news that they really didn't expect to be ready until the end of September. So this slide, I think, is a very useful reference. And Lena, we'll make sure everybody gets it for the council meeting, just laying out the timeline. So March 31st, you normally would have the data. It's 6 months later than that. July 21st is the date by which council must adopt the plan for redrawn districts because the filing period starts on July 24th or 26th. And so this is the normal sequence of events. And then the 2022 dates, which are effective if we defer, are as indicated there. Do we know for sure that March 8th is the primary day, Lena, or is that something that they could change?
Date that the State Board of Elections had released and proposed for 2022 as of February 11th. So that's from a spreadsheet that they circulated on their website on the 11th. Now, I will say the census data announcement came on Friday the 15th, last Friday. So it's potentially subject to change.
Right.
But I'd say that looks like about the Tuesday that you'd be, the second Tuesday in March, and then the runoff date and the November general election date. So yeah, possibly it could change.
All right, so we'll take that with us and make sure that all the slides are available to full council because they are useful. As I say, we'll just walk through what we've just talked about and let everybody else on council weigh in. And then with any luck, possibly even on Monday, we will have enough clarity on these issues to have a consensus on council, but we'll see how that plays out. And if everybody is okay, we can move to our next agenda item, which I believe is the water. Ms. Charles is going to talk to us about the stormwater and the water budget outlook. And you're on, Angela.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Driggs and committee members. And let's talk about water. Water transcends all districts and all areas in our community. And thank you for allowing us to present to you this afternoon. Can we get the mic?
Wendy, I believe we're ready for that presentation on the screen.
Is it Mike or Wendy?
It's Wendy. It's Wendy, and the presentation is live right now, so it's coming.
Okay.
Hey, while we wait, let me chime in with a little context. So I'll show after this our workshop schedule coming up, and we do have water and stormwater on the workshop as well. The idea is that this would be the more detailed portion. We'll give everyone the slides, ask a lot of questions, and then the workshop would really be just a very condensed version and to answer questions for the rest of council.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan. Wendy, while you are pulling that up, I can talk about One Water Strong so that we'll be further along in the presentation. But last fall, our city manager placed a stormwater under the direction of the Charlotte Water Director. And what was really kind of in the background or part of that decision was a one water philosophy. One water philosophy is somewhat new to this community, but it's not new in the water industry. So the further west that you go in our country, folks in the utility business or utility industry really have embraced the one water concept. And basically what it is integrated planning, it's leveraging resources, it is managing water resources with alignment and all types of waters, okay, being managed together for the long-term sustainability of the communities that we serve. And so next slide. And so why is that important? It's important because water, wastewater, and stormwater is really the foundation of any community. So we could put on the top part of this diagram, we could put the 2040 plan, we could put any kind of initiative that the city organization, city or county, organization is embarking upon, but what's down in the ground, what is the foundation would be water, wastewater, and stormwater. And so also let me just make a quick distinction here. Water being drinking water, wastewater being sewer or used water, and stormwater being rainwater, okay? And so before I said wash, brush, flush, okay, when you think about what our organizations do, now we're adding stormwater and we're adding rain to that, okay? So Mike is going to, I think, come up next. Come up, Mike, like you're here. I guess we're doing this virtual, and he's gonna talk about the stormwater part of the budget. And before I turn it over to Mike, we are still two distinct enterprise funds. So I also want to make sure that distinction is there. So we've got a water wastewater fund, and then we have a stormwater fund. So Mike is going to talk about the stormwater fund. Mike.
All right. Thank you, Angela, and good afternoon, council members. It's good to be with you this afternoon. So just to kind of transition on that, I will be presenting, of course, just the enterprise component of that is just stormwater. And so as we focus in on that, there's nothing about this presentation that doesn't support the One Water vision. That's a long-term strategic vision that we will be aspiring to kind of leverage as we go along. And so as we start to just kind of think about what then is the mission of stormwater services, let me tell you quickly about kind of what we're doing. I should have started with this. So the purpose, of course, is to preview kind of where we'll be, where we think we're going into the FY22 budget. And to get there, what I've got is 9 slides to really just tell you 3 things. It's just a little bit more about who we are, kind of what we've been up to lately, and then, of course, where we think we're going into the FY2022 budget. So just a little bit about what we do, kind of zooming in on this portion of the enterprise. So our mission there is up on the screen, but what I found it helpful to do in years past is just kind of break it apart and really just kind of think about stormwater as being 2 things. It's about water quantity and surface water quality. So I think many of you probably kind of been familiar with stormwater and the work we do, but essentially what we're just trying to do is keep a safe, particularly traveling public environment, minimize damage to property. But also as that rainwater ultimately arrives into our natural stream system, we want it to be as clean as it can be. And so then we think about sort of how does that show up in terms of what our work is, what we do every day, just a few things to kind of touch on. Many of you may know we operate as a joint utility with the county. We have unique but separate services that come together to form one entity called Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services. We are a creation of the Clean Water Act. A lot of what we do is mandated under federal regulation and informs a lot of what we do every day. We think about engagement and resident response. We do a lot of work in terms of community outreach, education, volunteerism. We also hear a lot from the community, and we're active on the ground in terms of projects in communities. And 2 other things I'll just highlight sort of in the bottom right of this graphic are land development and asset management. And I simply highlight them because in the life of our program, I would say those kind of become emerging pressures in our program, making sure we're keeping up with the city's growth pressure, but then also thinking about how are we taking care of our assets over time in a way that allow for the most financially responsible way to manage our drainage network. So what I'm going to go on from here is just kind of talk a little bit about, and I guess brag about the work of our people. And so it seems right that we just splash on the screen some faces. But I chose this picture because this is sort of the year of a pandemic, and this is maybe what a group photo looks like. And reflecting on our FY21, we're all working in these boxes on these virtual calls. And so as we go into then thinking about well, what's happened in FY21 and specifically what are the effects of COVID, I'll talk about it in 3 ways. The first of which is just the financial impact. So most of our activities are funded through stormwater fees that are charged to individual property owners. And when we look at that chart on the right, what you kind of can make out there are 2 different lines that are very tightly juxtaposed. The dashed line is what we send out the door as charges, and that rolls back to March of last year, kind of as a starting point for thinking about COVID, and then accumulating up through January of this year, just as a way to compare what has come back in terms of our collected revenue versus what we sent out as charges. And you'll see it's very tight. It's 1.2% difference in those two lines, representing about $700,000 of impact. So not an inconsiderable amount, but also not enough of a difference that it significantly impedes our operations. So then if we think about productivity, just an acknowledgement that I guess our workforce and kind of a little bit of a profile on us, 2/3 of our workforce tends to be of the sort that was able to transition pretty easily to work from home. It's not without its challenges, but one way or another, we're able to kind of overcome and find solutions for people to be able to sort of stay safe working from home, leaving about 1/3 of our workforce that really does its work on the ground in the field, door to door in some cases. And so we're able to kind of continue that work with extra precautions. And in some cases, we're having to suspend, say, volunteer events that would otherwise cause gatherings that might be a hazard from a public safety perspective. And then lastly, I would just say from a workforce impact, while on the one hand, you'll see just a couple slides later, we feel positive about the productivity of our workforce. It's worth acknowledging it's hard to sustain a virtual environment as it relates to just morale, training, people, and ongoing professional development. So whereas we've endured pretty well at the beginning of this, we're mindful that some things are become more challenging over time. So productivity, I won't spend too much on this, but I just would want to splash in front of you that our workload is about putting things in the ground, on the ground, with about 180 or so staff people. And maybe the important part from a budget perspective is just thinking about financial efficiency. So we're at about $86 million of invested capital that's invested in projects, and we're able to do that at a ratio of about 88 cents on the dollar of turning that into real capital investment on the ground. And part of that, of course, is trying to sustain as we have our AAA bond rating. So now as we go into just focusing on a couple of important initiatives that some of you all may remember from prior years. If we rewind back to FY 2020, some of you may know that we were at a place where our model at the time really wasn't sustainable as it related to taking in new work and trying to retire the work that people were bringing to our attention that needed repair. So we did a lot of things in that budget year. We kind of reformed the program in terms of what qualifies for our services. And we also laid out a 5-year plan that we've kind of come to calling the FiveYear Surge that said if we were to freeze kind of that workload at that time, it was about 1,700 projects. Could we knock out that volume of work in that time frame? What that would mean is about an 83% increase in output, and that in order to kind of ramp up our productivity, we set that up to where the rate of productivity output would increase year over year. So we'd have to outperform each year as we go. So then what you see in the graph on the right is that lowest line that's in gray is kind of where we were modeling off of going into 2020 that you might think of as our baseline productivity. The blue line kind of became, all right, how are we going to get to that 1,700 project mark? What's our path to that? And then what you then see in the green dots is kind of our first completed year, and then where we think we're going to end up at the end of this fiscal year, showing that we're staying on and slightly better than our plan. And I'll just note again, it gets harder as we go and requires continual innovation. It also requires that we do some things that we just kind of refer to as opening up the project pipeline. It does take resources. We have to push out more contracts that you all have seen come through on many of your council business meetings, thinking differently in some cases about our project delivery, and ultimately pushing a higher volume of capital out the door. So that graphic at the bottom is really just meant to kind of convey that opening up the pipeline to push more projects through year over year. And then also just thinking about how we're laying the groundwork for our asset management. So the idea here is, as we think about reform to the program, we really can't be operating on the basis of people just calling us and telling us what's broken. We've got to know where our things are, know what shape they're in, and take proactive interventions to extend their life, because it's a more financially responsible way to manage those assets. So we've been laying the groundwork for this for a few years, but part of our budget would cause this investment to increase over time. So as we start thinking in the years beyond the surge, it's really thinking about how do we maintain those assets. So lastly, I'll just close with kind of how all this comes together on the finance side. There's a lot of text here, but the first 3 bullets on the left, I'll just simply summarize by saying, most of our revenue comes from the stormwater fee that's on the water bill, and it's based on how much impervious area or concrete or otherwise surfaces that don't absorb rain, because that's what contributes ultimately to runoff. So everyone's paying the same amount on a per square foot basis, but it's grouped into tiers. You'll sometimes hear us talk about residential tiers. And what we do with that is then try to model over the next 10 years, in any given year, 10 years out, for what we think will be needed from a resource and finance perspective to support those strategic priorities that I just mentioned. And we do that in collaboration with finance and budget, and then have the city's financial consultant review that work. So then on the right is just a table that shows kind of going back to FY20 when we launched on this surge, what we thought the plan really looked like, what those first couple of years then came in terms of actuals. So you can see we've had 2 years behind us now of 0% fee increase. And as we kind of look at where we think we're going into 2022 and beyond, what we had modeled for was a 3.6% increase back in 2020. So that the ultimate or final recommendation will come from the city manager as part of the FY22 overall budget recommendation. But what I can tell you is, as we look at the models on this, we feel confident we would be under the 3.6 that we had originally modeled for at the onset of this plan. So those are kind of the big drivers and kind of how I think it all comes to a head. And I can take questions now, or Mr. Chair, we can turn it back over to Water and let them go through their material.
I'm not seeing that any hands are up. I would just say, Mike, for one, I think you've done a tremendous job of getting what was a bad situation under control. And for the benefit of the others, at one time, we had a backlog of service requests that equated to close to $1 billion, I think. And clearly we were just way out of step in terms of the services that we were offering and our ability to provide them. So my question for you, Mike, was if we go back to the way we used to look at the priority scale and so on, and the wait times, does what you just told us translate into shorter wait times than we were talking about before at the different priority levels?
Yeah, I think the short and simple answer is yes, it does. We are increasing our rate of output every year. And so as that backlog has come down, and I want to be clear, when we set out to take on the 1,700 projects, new work does come in. But our ability to push work out the door is overtaking our rate of taking in new work. And so year over year in the program over the next several years, we would expect those wait times to continue to diminish.
And there were things on the books that were essentially stale that we were able to just sort of remove, right? So we have audited, as it were, the list of service requests and updated their priority. And we're now acting on a more current understanding of what the demand is.
That's true. You hit on two important things. One is we have fully committed to the idea that we need to be focused on our highest priority work, and that wasn't always the case. It used to be a little more complicated than that. And part of what that meant is we had a lot of low priority work that I think council had decided many years ago we really shouldn't even be trying to allocate resources towards. You may remember, or others may recall as well, that we introduced a program to try to deal with those. But we also found that some of them were so old that we had 4,000 of our lowest priority requests that just when we went and updated who even lives there anymore, that number came down to 2,000. So cut in half just by updating kind of the books on those low priority requests.
So I have Ms. Ajmira and Ms. Eiselt. Ms. Ajmira.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Driggs nailed it. We had $1 billion problem, and here we are. Thanks, Mike, for your leadership and others in the water team to help us manage. I remember we used to get calls from constituents with the really long wait time, and I didn't have a better answer to say, I'm sorry, but we just don't really have the manpower that we need to address all the requests. So certainly there were some policy changes and programs that resulted in that reducing our workload. I'm trying to figure out, to follow up on Mr. Driggs' question, what does the wait time look like now for high priority items that we are continuing to work on? And also, if you can go back to the last presentation slide, the last slide, okay. So I remember when we had looked into this problem in depth and trying to solve it a couple of years ago, there was a fee schedule where there was going to be an increase for a couple of years for us to continue to meet or at least address the high priority items. So is that 6%? Is that still the case?
Yep. So I heard two questions in that. First, as to wait times. As I said before, those wait times will continue to diminish year over year. And there's really never a static answer. But what I can tell you is when we get a high priority issue come to our attention, and let me paint a picture real quick of that, that could be like a sinkhole opening up in a street. There's no wait time on that. That is, we immediately put into effect whatever needs to happen to resolve those things. And some summers we can get the kind of seasonal impacts of weather that will cause us to have a lot of high priority things that we respond to more or less immediately. Conversely, what can happen, though, is as those things happen, those outer year requests can end up taking longer. So what we had said years ago was, a couple of years ago, we'll say back in FY 2020, was that there could be some things on our list that might be 7 years of wait before we even start working on that. So that is moving up. That wait time is diminishing. But it could still vary quite a bit based on kind of how many new high priority things come in ahead of you. And it really just depends what kind of an issue you're talking about as to what that wait time is, but it does diminish. And then the other part of it, just in terms of the plan. So when you're looking at this screen, the 3.6, when we do a model, it's based on a lot of high level assumptions about all kinds of things. And so this was our best bet or best guess as to what we thought it would take to fund the work necessary to deal with that slate of work. And so what we thought it would be is 3.6 in pretty much every year of that plan. And what we found was, we're able to come in a little less than that, but I don't know what that final number is going to be, but I feel confident in telling you it won't be as high as 3.6. And then when we get into the next year, we will update models based on revised data that we have and see how that tracks against the model.
Thank you, Mike. So how is our list looking at this point for high priority items? I know back a couple of years ago we had thousands, and I know that you all had gone back and sent mails, and that number has gone down. And you may not have that information right now, but if you could just let us know, what does that list look like for high priority items, those that are in next priority, and so on. But,
sure, happy to provide that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
So I have Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mike, thank you for this. I know you guys have done a lot of work on trying to address this backlog issue. One question I have is that, from your perspective, do we, while you're all working really hard on solving the problems, are we creating the problems with some of our, what we allow in our rezonings and what, pipe size that we allow developers to put in when they build a new neighborhood or subdivision? Are there things within our rezoning policies that you think are not helping you to work down the backlog?
Mayor Pro Tem Eisel, thank you for that question. It's a big opening, and I'll refrain from saying maybe everything I'd love to say on this, but I'll start by saying the reason we have a stormwater program in the first place is ultimately to deal with development pressure. But in saying that, and what I mean by that is the community will drain fine on its own had we not built a city up around it that creates sort of runoff and those pressures. So what we do around land development matters a lot to the ongoing success of stormwater services. My view on kind of where we are with land development, this is painting with a very broad brush. We have for many, many years had good development regulations that have kept up with the type of growth that Charlotte was experiencing. Greenfield development growing outward. We'd create retention ponds. We would do the things that you needed to do to adequately deal with drainage. We're facing two types of pressures now. One is that's not the generation of development we're seeing now. It's more infill, it's more granular, and our older regulations aren't really that well suited to smaller scale development that's still impacting people on an individual home level. So that's something we've got to pay attention to in the UDO. And then the second frontier is really just, it just kind of gets to state oversight of our local regulation. We lost a tool in our toolbox recently in terms of our ability to use some of our regulations on redevelopment of projects or land development, commercial uses that already had a lot of impervious area that really set us back. So there's a lot of good that goes on, but to your question, yes, what happens in land development matters a lot to us.
You okay?
Okay. Yeah, I am. But if, you know, and you don't need to talk about it now, but if there are things that, and in fact, I had to end another meeting early because our planning commission has talked a lot about this, that they would like to be, they would actually like a text amendment to address some of these environmental issues, which, you know, we're working on the UDO. So that would be very difficult to do. But just aside from this meeting, I would love to get recommendations from you as to what we could be doing, you know, permissible by state law that would really help to address this issue. Because we had a zoning last night where a third of an acre piece of land, a developer wanted to put 3 houses on it, and there was like virtually no, I mean, the whole thing would pretty much be impervious space. So would love recommendations on some of those things. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say from a district rep perspective, I don't have the history when there was that backlog, but I can say that the stormwater department has been very responsive to the district when we get inquiries. Your staff, Mike, has been really great. I've personally worked with a supervisor named Scott, and they've just been very responsive. One of the things I see in my area is, I don't know if it's because of the age of the homes or the way that they're settling, we do have some problems with drainage in the area that might be the residents' responsibilities. So if there's any opportunity to solve that proactively from a zoning approval, that would be great to incorporate into our process. But also community outreach to our residents, maybe what homeowners should be doing at a certain age of, you know, when the house is, you know, a certain age, or what we need to know as residents and homeowners to avoid that, because there's a lot of drainage areas or problems in my district and some of the subdivisions that aren't necessarily the city's responsibilities, but it does affect the residents. So just 2 things. I want to thank you for your staff. I've not noticed a backlog, and my residents always feel like they're high priority. So I don't know if customer service is one of those high priorities, but that's the way it's perceived. And if there's any way that we can start to educate the homeowners, if there are grants available or something from a resident perspective, because it does seem to be a problem in some areas and it could be from the development or, again, the age of the home or whatever the issue is. We have that issue in at least some of the subdivisions in District 4. So thank you.
Those comments are well taken, and thank you for your words. I'll share that with the team. It'll mean a lot.
So we need to move to water. I would just say quickly, the UDO or somewhere, we will need to revisit our stormwater policies, PCCO, fee in lieu, incentives for mitigation. And I don't want to open all that right now, but needless to say, probably all of those things will probably need to be revised as we try to update our policies. I will say the takeaway from all of this in my mind is We are not looking at any really scary rate increases. As we discussed, it might be needed in the past, so we can take that off the table. We're looking at a timeline of trying to stay under the 3.6% that's in our plan. And we have good news in terms of the progress that's been made about the backlog. I think those are the headlines. And I congratulate you on both fronts. I think this is a vast improvement over where we were a couple of years ago. So if we can, let's proceed to water then. Ms. Charles. And sorry, did you need to say anything, Ryan? I don't mean to leave you out of this conversation.
No, I'm good, Mr. Driggs. Thank you.
All right. So, Ms. Charles, you're on.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Driggs. And again, this is the Charlotte wastewater part of the presentation. Charlotte Water is one of the largest wastewater agencies in the country. It is a city-county consolidated agency managed by the city. The vision of this utility, and it's a regional utility, is to be a leading water utility recognized for excellence and dedicated to the people, the community, region, and environment. And I wanted to read that because Charlotte Water serves about 1.2 million people in our region. And during this pandemic, there has not been a loss of service. And so when we talk and think about COVID and how important water is in terms of preventing, information has been out there about wash your hands, keep your hands clean. It's been very important for Charlotte Water to be able to perform. And I think another lesson from COVID is that the organization itself has realized the intersectionality that we felt like was already there, but the importance of water to public health. Next slide.
And Ms. Charles,
yes,
we are on we've got about 15 minutes left.
Oh, we do?
So I apologize, but
okay.
Get through it in a short time.
Okay. Sure, Chairman Driggs, and I will speed it up some. And so the only thing I want to say about this slide is that Charlotte Water continues to be well managed financially. We are one of the few utilities of our size that is rated AAA by all three rating agencies. Last year, Charlotte Water completed $280.7 million investment into our community for capital projects, and a gallon of water only costs 3 cents, okay? So when you look at the 5-year capital program, it's a $2.38 billion program. When we really look at the buckets, there are 2 buckets, and these are always competing buckets for Charlotte Water. 1, how much do we spend for capacity for growth? Okay, and so we are planning $1.3 billion, and the other bucket is rehab and rehabilitation, $545 million over the next 5 years. Again, we have to make sure that we've got capacity for growth, very tied, closely tied to regulations, okay? That's required, okay? Because water and wastewater is heavily regulated, just as Mike talked about stormwater. And again, how do we take care of what we have? That's the rehab and replacement bucket that's there. Next slide. Capital spending, just wanted to give council and the committee a feel for capital spending. Last year, the budget was $275 million, $280 million was out of the door. So again, even in the midst of a pandemic, just for us to stay on track and do what we need to do, we have to keep up with the capital spending and the projects that need to be done for our system. Investments in the corridors of opportunity, just wanted to give you all a feel for how water is also working in those corridors. And so there are many projects that are spread throughout the corridors of opportunity. Next slide. Supporting our community. If you notice in this picture, the guy here has a mask on. This is representative of Charlotte Water continuing to support the internship program and bringing in apprentices and providing and teaching folks in water and wastewater careers. And so that's important, again, because we want water, again, to be a leader in this area in our community. Pandemic response, again, I talked earlier, Charlotte Water serving 1.2 million people in the region. We were able to do that with well-trained employees. Let me repeat the success triangle. For a utility our size to be successful, it takes three things. One, support of council, that's you all. Two, support of the community. And three, well-trained employees. And so part of what we had to do was to mobilize, set up a command structure. Of course, Charlotte Water has about 1,000 employees, again, working. This is an example of our folks stopping by and getting temperature checks, providing PPE to come to work. You know, we have just tried to do everything that we could to keep our employees safe as much as possible, and also to protect our facilities. We kind of had to put a few of them in a bubble, okay, so that we could protect our water and wastewater plants in our lab and also protect our field folks. We do anticipate a 7 to 10 million impact on revenue, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But again, just you know, it's been difficult for our folks to work. Many of them teleworking, many of them don't have a choice. We have to have people at plants. We have to have people in the field. We have to have people in our labs, and we are here to support them. Account impacts. This relates to the $7 to $10 million impact that I talked about earlier. Pre-COVID, we would have about 3,000 disconnects per month. Now it seems as if we're carrying around 16,000 accounts that are eligible for disconnection during this time of COVID. Now, we are exercising leadership in this area. Just about every other utility has resumed delinquent disconnections or delinquent cutoffs. We have made the choice not to do so. In October of last year, at the end of the executive order, we made the decision to put folks in our community on a 1-year payment plan, thus, we think implying that we're not going to resume disconnects until October. Did I say October? October of 2021. And so again, we are exercising leadership in this area and plan to have more of a communication to folks in our community this summer about how we can resume our disconnections in October. We developed a customer care team. And so we have 200 ambassadors who are going to contact about 17,000 customers in our service area. We have contacted over 9,000 folks already. We are not aware of any other utility our size that's made a commitment to contact every customer who is eligible for delinquency. The other lesson of COVID that we've realized is that we really do need to partner more with local agencies to help people in our community who are in need. If you look at this graph here and you see the shaded blue lines, those are food nutritional pockets in our community. And what we've done is we've overlaid folks that just addresses the folks who are delinquent. A lesson of this is that we have folks outside of the city of Charlotte limits who are Charlotte Water customers who aren't eligible for funds coming into the city of Charlotte that we need to have a program for. So thus what we're working on is a Charlotte Water Foundation. We ran this idea by our Citizen Advisory Committee and they love it. And the whole idea here is that we need some type of foundation that would cover any customer that Charlotte Water serves, whether you're in Mecklenburg County or you're in Iredell County or if you're in Gaston County. We have a foundation to kind of lead you through to get you assistance. Louisville Water has the prototype. So if you want to Google a utility that has something that we are looking at, it's called Drops of Kindness. But that is another lesson of COVID that we feel like we really need to find a way to help folks more in our community. Let's get to rate increases. Again, we have a plan here. We have a financial model. We work with rate consultants. And so we will be recommending an increase that will be, again, within the range of the projections that you have here. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Well, that was a super job of telling a great story in a short time. So thank you, Angela. And
sure.
I'm not seeing any hands up yet. We talked recently about the fact that there was some $50 million of CARES Act money that was headed our way, and the manager proposed an allocation. So is a portion of that intended for relief of utility bills, water bills?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. $3.6 million has been allocated. And again, that has rejuvenized our folks on the customer care team because again, we can continue to contact folks and we're picking up the phone and calling. We have many of our teleworkers doing that and to tell them that money has been allocated to assist them. And there are many anecdotal stories out there from folks in our community who are very, very happy that there is something there and that assistance is available.
Councilmember Ajmira.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Charles, thank you for excellent customer service. And when we look at the account impacts, we can see that post-COVID, if you look at the numbers pre-COVID and COVID numbers, there are 5 times more.
Yes.
To account that are behind. So it's great to see that your department is actively working with these residents. I have had 2 constituents who reached out to me and they were worried about getting their Charlotte water disconnected. And I know that your department was able to address their concerns, so certainly appreciate it. And also a great job on the pandemic response with making hand sanitizers available for our employees in a time where it was difficult and then there was a shortage. So overall, thanks so much, Ms. Charles.
Thank you for those comments. I will certainly pass those along to staff.
And I think one of the harshest implications of COVID, aside from the loss of a place to live, is the possibility of not having water. And your efforts to spare people that hardship have been exceptional. And so congratulations to you and your staff for your response to COVID and also for your management of the finances of Charlotte Water. I assume that you're hopeful then, without pinning you down too much, that you will be at or below the projected increase this year. Is that a safe statement?
I think it's safe, I'm going to say in the range.
All right.
You know, normally we say we beat the plan, not quite sure because of the increase last year was 1.8, so it wasn't really according to the plan. If you look at it there, Chairman Driggs, but we think it will be in that range.
No, and I think that's excellent performance. Again, it's given the adversity of COVID that we've been dealing with. So thank you so much for that. We have one more item on our agenda, which I think we can deal with quickly. Mr. Bergman.
Yeah, so same as last time when I presented the workshop agenda. Wendy, if we could get that pulled up, and it should just take me a minute to talk through it unless there's some questions. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place when we do these workshops because we're trying to get you guys as much information, and there's a lot of good information we have to get you. But at the same time, we want to leave as much time as possible for discussion among city council members. So we had a lot of good discussion last time, a lot of good questions on some of the earlier presentations, but it didn't allow us to have a lot of council-directed discussion on CIP priorities at the end. So what we wanted to do this time is start this workshop with a discussion on CIP priorities, which would not be a presentation. Had some really good discussions yesterday, Ms. Ajmira among them, on some of our CIP with questions and answers and comments. So I think council members are doing their work for that discussion. Beyond that, we need to talk a little bit about solid waste services, about some of the trends with automation and vehicles and worker safety. There's some implications there that we need to get in front of you guys. For the last year and a half, we've been working on a ADA consultant report on a long-term plan for city facilities, which we will get in front of you. As I mentioned, stormwater and water would be coming back for a more condensed version, ideally, where it's more about answering questions based on the information that they've presented today. And then finally, arts and cultural funding, which still needs to be developed a little bit as we're tracking along with the ad hoc committee, but we wanted to save space for some type of discussion there. So with that, this is what we currently have planned, and I'll open it up for questions.
I'm not seeing any questions, so I will take that quickly as an indication of the committee's agreement with this proposal. You don't need a vote or anything from us, right?
No, just like to get in front of you guys.
Okay, so good work on that. We'll look forward to hearing the details on those items. Unless any committee member has anything else, I think we're ready to wrap up.
Thanks, everybody.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all in favor, sign off. Thanks, everybody.